It's September 22nd, 2022, and we're beginning the planning board meeting without any of the usual preliminary regulatory matters or park director's report, and going straight to item 5, the Montgomery Parks Data Analytics Strategic Plan. And for that, we have an introduction, I think, from Mr. Riley.
Chair, before we begin the introduction, I'd like to welcome back Commissioner Cici. As he indicated recently, he has had some health challenges, and it's wonderful to see him here on the dais with us today.
Thank you very much for that. I'm sure we all
Thank you.
join that.
Appreciate that. And the well wishes I received, the little refreshments was enjoyed very much. So the fruit and stuff, candy was helpful to get my mind off recovery. So thank you very much for planning people and parks as well, and the commission's office.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All 5 of us all here in one piece. Mike or Hassan?
Yeah, just a very brief statement. I rode down on the elevator with some of the data analytics team and was kind of joking that this is a very good day because when your bosses tell you to do something, which is to manage the Parks Department more by utilizing data analytics, and you actually deliver, that's a good day. So I think you're going to hear some very good news today. This team does deliver on a regular basis, and I can say a week does not go by where I'm not using data or dashboards to make decisions about the Parks Department. So I want to thank them, and I hope you're equally impressed with their work as I am.
All right, I'll get it started. So good morning, Chair Anderson, Vice Chair Verma, and the commissioners. For the record, my name is Shuchi Vera, and I'm the Chief of the Management Services Division for Montgomery Parks. I have with me here Hassan Sims, who's the Data Analytics Manager. And as Mike mentioned, we have a whole crew back here, if they could raise their hands. They are some of them. These are some of the members of the data analytics team. So we are here to share with you our data analytics strategic plan. It's a 4-year plan, and we're sharing it with you because, as Director Riley mentioned, we are very proud of the work that we've done, especially recently around data in parks. I would say maybe like a decade ago, you wouldn't really put data and parks together. But because of the resources that you've given us, the support that you've given us, and also Chair Anderson's real push to sort of embed and infuse data in almost everything that we do, we are here today presenting you a plan, a 4-year plan, that I think is pretty transformative. It really takes us to the next level. I think you're going to be very impressed. But what we hope to do is do even more in the next 4 years than we've done in the last 4 years to really, step up and get to that next level of data. So I guess I'll just end off by saying the data that we have collected and analyzed over the last several years has really, it's not just data kind of sitting there, right? Even the more important part of data collection and data analysis is visualizing it, making it transparent, making it accessible, not just to our staff, but also the public. And I think with that, we have really helped not just our park system and our assets and things like that, but really it comes down to helping our patrons. How can we use data to help our patrons to make our park system better? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hassan.
Thank you, Suchi. Is this on? All right. All right. Good morning, commissioners. You all should have received a copy of the Data Analytics Strategic Plan, and I want to review it with you on what this 4-year strategic plan aims to do for the department. Yeah. Before we go into the purpose, I'd like to give you some history of our program. 2004, Montgomery Parks implemented a work order system for operations to manage our work program. We were one of the first in the commission to realize this need. In 2012, Montgomery Parks started to work with Prince George's Parks and Recreation to create a system that would be able to give us a better understanding of how much it costs to maintain and operate our park system by capturing costs from our work orders and to have a more robust system to perform operations like GIS and scheduling work orders to increase efficiencies. In 2014, Infor went live for both Montgomery County Parks and Prince George's County Parks and Recreation. 2017, Montgomery County Parks created a strategic plan for EAM, which I came in front of the board to get approval, and to create a framework and vision to better utilize this software, to ensure our department is making data-driven decisions. In 2019, Montgomery County Parks created another strategic plan around GIS to optimize the utilization of this technology within our department. 2020, the data analytics section was created because our program grew with GIS and dashboards to visualize data, and it's more in line with our industry, and it was more fitting with the work we do. In 2021, the first set of integrations for EAM were implemented. For example, single sign-on, where people can use their computer credentials for the EAM system and customer relationship management connection with EAM to streamline the flow of patron issues to automatically create a work order in EAM, which created an efficiency. Infor EAM also sold the system to Hexagon, who is more in tune with asset management and AI technology, so that it was a plus for us moving forward. Now for the meat of the strategic plan. This graphic represents 4 pillars of the data analytics strategic plan. It starts with the vision, which is the data analytics team provides services to enhance and support the department's data-driven goals. It has 4 pillars that are core to data analytics, which are assets, automation, analytics, and outreach and education. Each of these will be explained further in the coming slides as goals. And the mission synthesizes all 4 pillar goals, which are provide accurate and meaningful information of our park system assets, automate and streamline business processes, foster efficiencies, improve and better decision-making, enable employees to utilize data-driven technologies to their full potential. All right. The asset pillar is extremely important because it's the foundation of our system, and all of our analysis is derived from these assets. Assets vary from BMX tracks, greenhouses, golf, and water parks as pictured. We have over 40,000 assets in our system currently, and it's continually growing. This pillar benefits are to ensure our data is relevant to our departmental goals, ensure information is consistently being updated with accurate information, enable staff and visitors to know where plants are located within gardens for maintenance and enjoyment purposes, and allow staff the ability to easily access utility usage throughout the park system. The next pillar is automation. It is one of our newer pillars, but extremely important for us to implement if we want to keep up with the data analytics world and the new AI world. Big data, unstructured raw data from various sources, as you can see from the bubble in the graphic. They are other sources of information that are swirling around different databases, but are essential to incorporate into our analysis. And we need to automate the process with so much information, it would be impossible for us to do this manually. This information is important because we need to digest this data to make sound analytic products like dashboards to make better data-driven decisions. Our plan is to automatically feed our current systems, which are on the right with the information from other sources, and have our current system talk directly to each other's automatically. This will ensure all of our information is accurate and consistent. The goal is to increase efficiencies to deliver more robust analytic tools, output close to real time. This is our next frontier, and we're excited to embark on it. The next pillar is analytics. This pillar ensures data and analytic tools are available to meet departmental plans and needs like the PROS plan, and to help us prioritize parks' needs through analysis of several data points that can be enhanced by automating big data and our current systems. Currently, we have started to showcase several tools and data sets that can help the division with their work programs. It is an internal webpage called ParkStat that has information of our current analytic tools like dashboards and data sets. The last pillar is outreach and education. The purpose of this pillar is to ensure staff have the knowledge on how to use EAM, GIS, and dashboards and understand how it can be used in their everyday work. We currently create training videos on LinkedIn Learning, in person and in virtual trainings to help staff understand the different systems, and we currently have a quarterly newsletter that sends out information about what we do as a team for the organization. User group meetings on GIS, EAM, and dashboards are also held frequently to keep staff in the know. And we have 2 signature events every year, GIS Day and the Data Analytics Summit. This provides the department insight on what is new in the data analytics world and gives them an understanding on how they can potentially use it. This pillar is to build on what we are currently doing and enhance it where we can. Now, what this means all in short, this is a graphic of a data analytics maturity continuum. The x-axis is analytics maturity and is defined as a sequence of steps that represents the evolution of an organization in its ability to manage its internal and external data and use this data to inform business decisions. The y-axis is the competitive advantage and is defined as the conditions or circumstances that puts an organization in a favorable or superior business position. As our analytics progresses, our ability to inform business decisions get better. We are at the descriptive stage. Our data can tell us what happened. We know the current status of our assets, but our current data is descriptive only in nature. In the future, we want to be able to provide more predictive analysis based on our own data and on data we bring in from National Weather Service, US Census, state data, and other several sources. In other words, it's other big data that we're utilizing. The more data we have, the better our predictions on our analysis increases. An example of predictive analysis: does the weather hinder attendance at events, or if we build a playground, will the same factors as another location, will it be utilized at the same capacity? We want this so we can make prescriptive decisions. In other words, future predictions that are grounded in data, the artificial intelligence frontier. Through understanding trends will help us forecast an increase or decrease of our maintenance regimes and can help us explore adding more amenities in underrepresented or underutilized parks. The end goal is to have data-driven CIP allocations to ensure all our money is spent wisely for our park patrons and taxpayers of the county. I would like to thank all of you for supporting the data analytics team, and we'd appreciate you to continue your support as we embark on this new part of our data journey with this 4-year new strategic plan. I would also like to thank the core team that's in Management Services Division and the satellite crew who are in we affectionately call them the satellite crew, in the Northern Parks Division, Southern Parks Division, Park Development Division, and the Horticultural, Forestry, and Environmental Education Division. They work tirelessly to make this program a reality, and all of our divisions, because data is part of everyone's program in one way or the other. And all of this is not possible without all of them. Thank you.
I'd like to start with first, thank you for the presentation. And then second, a thanks to you and your team. I've actually witnessed you guys deliver presentations. You're probably some of the best instructors I've seen, and I've seen some horrible ones, but you're among the best, especially when you're delivering about a topic that is sometimes difficult for people to wrap their arms around or understand what the long-term implications are, as you indicated. That we're talking about the current state, but the future state of data and what you can do with data is endless. I recall being an early champion of this effort, an early adopter of this effort, and before you instructors arrived, I attended the training at Green Farm. I was the only person who was not a park staff in the room, and when they found I wasn't a park staff person, they were like, well, why are you here? Because as a member of the general public, I would be using the data. So I wanted to see what it would look like, what the source was, how it could be used. And I think what you gave the example of letting the public know, and I think it's a good idea so people that understand, and I can remember talking with Director Riley, explaining to people why a particular park hadn't been mowed. EAM supports that. Why isn't that mowing occurring every week? Well, EAM will show for that particular park, it may not be needed, or we had 5 rain days back to the weather, so going out there is going to actually damage the equipment if that person mows too soon. So you can tell, early adopter, champion, love the idea. I wanted to ask you about a couple of things. One was the automation pillar. Looking at the left side of your presentation, you had a lot of third-party applications, and if you want to go to that slide, that's fine. And on the right side, you had EAM and some other applications. Have you started thinking about the schema for automation, what that looks like? Do you have a hierarchy of which applications, if any, you'd like to work with first? And I can remember when EAM first started, it was pretty siloed and didn't want to play well with others. And at one point, I remember asking you, do we need to abandon EAM and look at something else? And you said, be patient. Well, I was patient, and it sounds like you've made progress. So that's my first question.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, we are definitely actually creating a plan right now. We're in the midst of talking to different vendors in terms of the big data, but with speaking with them, we found out that we definitely need to prioritize all the different data sets. So one of the parts of the data strategic plan is to figure out all the different data sets that we have currently in-house as well externally, and to prioritize that. As you know, all of that costs money, so we're trying to see how much it's going to cost to prioritize and implement certain ones that'll give us more bang for our buck as we move forward. So yes, we are definitely integrating a lot of the systems. Another thing we've integrated with the implementation with Energy Cap, we've done that. We've also, as I said, the CRM, which is pretty awesome, and then we're looking forward to integrating with other systems that are within our organization as well as external.
Okay. My second question, sorry, I have I have 2 more questions. The second question, again, it's related to the automation, but also the future state. As far as data analytics and security, it's overarching, but is there a particular part of this flow that you want to focus more on the security, securing that data, maintaining that data, making sure that access is on an as-needed basis?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's part of our data journey is once we finalize prioritizing this information, we definitely have to look at the security issues and seeing who needs to know what type of information, because it's extremely important and paramount to our success to make sure that the information is protected throughout. And we work closely with ITI, with firewalls and the likes.
And I know Vice Chair is waiting on me, so I'll go ahead. I had made a note about AI and blockchain, and you mentioned AI a little bit. And ArcGIS in particular has really been looking at AI. Are any of the other vendors open, supportive of possibly partnering with us? I heard your mention of money. Has that discussion happened with them, or do you think you would consider that approach, talking with them about using AI or partnering with them on the AI piece of it?
Yes. One of the organizations that we're working with right now, they give us big data for park visitation, and they're on the AI front, and they're actually working with National Spatial Intelligence Agency. And that is a potential, but we haven't really vetted that as of yet. But there's always opportunities out there, but yes.
Okay. I'm going to turn my mic off. Vice Chair is waiting.
No, no, no. Please. I had 3 points to make. First of all, the data is only as good as the source, right? So there are many different ways of collecting data. And of course, the public often who's utilizing the parks do have not only the ability to observe things probably in real time or the ability to capture it in a way that we may not be able to capture it. Have we thought about incorporating some sort of public input as a way of getting information? Of course, if we would have to verify in some regards, but recognizing the general public trust, like maybe posting a picture, sending us a picture of a tree branch that's blocking a running path, for instance. Have you thought about integrating that level of data within this construct?
We absolutely have. I know other jurisdictions are doing that right now. I actually live in one that has launched applications like that that are sort of based in crowdsourcing and getting input from the public. We have worked on, the integration that Hassan mentioned earlier with the EAM, the Enterprise Asset Management System, and the CRM, which is a Customer Relationship Management System, is sort of part of that thinking. But I think we can do a lot more. Where I see we can do more, and Hassan can probably expand on the capabilities of EAM to do this, is having a very robust mobile app, a mobile component, where the public can, wherever they are, feed us information about a broken fence or a tree down. Right now, that's kind of all happening through the CRM, but we definitely have thought about it, and I want Hassan to sort of expand to see if that's something that we can look into through our enterprise asset management system.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, that is definitely possible. Going back to the pillar of automation, where there's different types of ways you can get information from as long as it's integrated. Thinking of Twitter, right? You're on Twitter and you see an issue and you post a picture. We could potentially, we haven't looked into it as of yet, and of course it costs resources and everything. That could be a potential where they post a picture and like, oh, this bench is broken, and it could potentially pop into some type of automation where it can, in real time, come into the EAM system and create a work order and get vetted, or CRM or any of the other systems that we have in-house. So that is definitely a potential, and we can definitely look into that and make that a project.
Great. And just 2 more comments. So the data doesn't say anything. It's the interpretation of the data, right? And I don't know how you're set up internally, but sometimes I'm assuming you have data analysts that are a part of the team, and it's really important to make sure that they not only are analyzing the data, but also have an understanding of the park's operations. And I think sometimes those two, I've seen in organizations that doesn't happen as much, but I'm assuming that's the case here. But that's just really important, because sometimes I've seen in organizations where the data is there, you have the expertise on how to analyze it, but they're missing that one component of really understanding. And maybe it's a group effort, like maybe that's a contribution that your staff can offer. But just that's something that you should always keep in the back of your mind as a best practice is, ensuring that there's that intersection for how you're actually interpreting the data. I'm actually attending a 4-hour artificial intelligence workshop in Austin, Texas next month. I'm supposed to be the AI lead for my current employer. So I will report back and let you know what I find out. I deal with data at work. I'm the senior privacy counsel for that. And so this is my kind of subject matter expertise. So I'm very interested to see how we move forward, and I think we're doing some cutting edge stuff, and sounds like you guys have a great team, and I'm really wishing you well on the next couple of years, but this is all very exciting, and thank you so much for your work.
I have just two questions. One of us, I guess, is a comment. First of all, it's great work. I think it's fabulous. And one of the things is, I was wondering, or I'm assuming, that this is the way that the Parks Department has approached making sure that we address the equity focus areas, because it puts the data in. Because my comment is, every time I ask that question of park staff, when you make a presentation on, for example, the pros plan or anything else, I get a great positive answer that, in fact, it is that you are addressing those issues. So kudos on that. I see your head nod, so I know that that is going towards that. So I kudos on that. Thank you. And then the other question is, I recall from my days in the general counsel's office that there was a Department of Justice issue with regard to ADA compliance on many park facilities. And I don't know what the status of that is, but has that been addressed through this, or does this help in your responses on that particular, on those concerns that have been raised by the feds?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So yes, we actually have a dashboard that the ADA team uses, the accessible team, my apologies, that they use that to make sure that they know all the different barriers that are within our park system, and they work tirelessly to remediate all those different barriers in a systematic way throughout the years. So we're in compliance with the federal law right now. So they take a stab at it every single year, and they keep going down, so we can actually measure our progress throughout the year.
Okay, so for my closing comment is, like, I can't tell you how fabulous this is, because it seems to have, arms all over, and it addresses, it seems to be a very universal, holistic approach to the way that we can actually operate the parks and implement the programs that we want to implement, and do it in a way that meets the needs of all of our communities. And I think it's great. So great
Thank
work
you.
to all of you.
Thank you. And I just want to add something else that I forgot to add. We also have the information on what is ADA accessible, what type of parks are ADA accessible throughout that, and making sure that information is updated is important, because then the constituents know exactly what parks they can go to.
Okay, so, and I also assume that you're working closely. We're going to be dealing with the pedestrian master plan later today. And I'm assuming, and there's a part in that master plan that talks about park accessibility, not just access to the park, but access within the park. And I assume your data is also helping with that, and you're coordinating with that team?
Yes.
Jerry Sishy, I just compliment you on your presentation, and the quality of the system looks great. Couple questions is, and maybe it's on the chart and I didn't know, but is it kind of a feedback loop? What you've identified is kind of growing areas with growing population, maybe looking, and this is with the help of planning, maybe working with them, school population that's growing, so you have an age of the school, what type of playgrounds, I'm on the racial equity and social justice, but again, new people coming to the county, that's generated some new sports, like a cricket area that we did, and of course the pickleball, all that. So is there like a feedback which would help your budget? And is there working with, say, planning on changing demographics? Like a new development comes in, yes, it might be 4 or 5 years, but there is a playground there or something, parkland that you did receive, so it's programming it in the capital program to make those improvements. So when that subdivision is completed, there might be a park that's accessible, and again, somewhat school population related. But a good presentation, well done. So
Thank you.
Comment on the coordination with planning.
Yes, we work hand in hand with the planning department as well as the planners in the parks department on all those issues that you've stated. So they utilize our information. We are not the subject matter experts for that type of work, but we help them with the information, and then they try to give us the methodology on how they want to create that analysis so they can identify
But I see it coming
potentials.
back to you whether you might plan to program in your budget or the capital budget or operating budget, facility, park facilities. to
Yes,
meet
yes, they utilize our information with their expertise.
that. Okay, or vice versa, that you would say, yes, it's in your plan, the plan.
Yes.
And we are going to program it and try to get it funded.
Yeah, so we pull information from different sources, and then they analyze it with the different tools that we have in their expertise way of what opportunities we have to make sure that we meet our
Thank you very
departmental
much.
goals.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chair, I did have one more question for both Ms. Sims as well as, sorry, Mr. Sims and Ms. Vera. You mentioned money several times, and my colleague just mentioned money. I'm assuming that as we start the fiscal year 2024 discussions, that you will have some figures for us to look at with your priorities?
Right now,
So I'll answer that question. Yeah. I am in the middle of preparing the budget presentation for the board's consideration. And one of the steps in that process is I have pretty much an all-day meeting with all of my senior leadership and their budget managers. And as you can imagine, I hear a lot of requests from the different programs and operations across the department. So I am in the middle right now of working with my team to prioritize those requests, and those will come to you throughout a budget work session in the next few weeks.
Excellent. And also, I'll start my mantra again. Mix your portfolio. Start looking for funding outside of this organization and county. You're in a hot spot. You've got opportunity.
Okay, thanks very much. I think that was well received all around. We're going to go to item 10, which is acquisition of the Hollywood Branch parcel.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple, I want to give you a report. I've replaced our vice chair's role on the racial justice, social equity, and one of the things that did come up was a presentation on the Thrive 2050 and opportunity for additional input into that. They had someone that did a kind of an independent study, volunteer study on information. The county executive also spoke on what he saw some differences. I guess it's still under consideration of the county council to some degree. So 3 parties involved, us involved. The issue came up possibly looking at the potential, which I raised in our FY24 budget, whether there could be some kind of task that could kind of update somewhat the 2050 plan as we get data. Kind of like the feedback we just talked about parks, as population changes, do we have to program at different facilities? But that would be an option that came up. I guess it's still under discussion, the county exec to the council, our input to the council, and whether that would be something that kind of a budget item that might provide for update of the plan, 2050 plan. So just wanted to report that. That was the major discussion last night on the committee.
Thank you very much for that, Jerry. Yeah, I think there will be many opportunities after Thrive is presumably adopted in the next couple of weeks. They're planning on doing that to adopt some refined implementation measures, not actually to modify the plan, but to set out the details of how that will be
I
carried
agree
out.
with you. That was the point that I made. We didn't want to, stop it, but we wanted to move it, but to say, okay, there's a provision where you can take a look at it periodically, and maybe there's additional information that might update it.
Yes, I think that can be accommodated. Okay, let's move to item 10. Okay, we're now ready to discuss acquisition of the Hollywood Branch parcel to become part of Paint Branch Stream Valley Park.
Yeah, good morning. Henry Coppola, Park Development Division, Real Estate Management Section. Happy to be here in person with you guys for a change. Last couple acquisitions we've had, we're all digital still. As you mentioned, this is an acquisition for expanding the Paint Branch Stream Valley Park, and it's fairly simple, so hopefully I'll be able to take you guys through it pretty quickly. We're calling this the Hollywood Branch parcel. You can see on the general location map for the county here, it's over in the East County along the Paint Branch Stream Valley Park. It's a little bit north of the MLK Rec Park, and we'll zoom in a little bit more. You can see the surrounding parkland here, Cannon Road Local Park up into the northwest, Paint Branch Stream Valley Park to the right there, and some of the local parks that fit into the Paint Branch section. And you can see why we call this the Hollywood Branch parcel, with the Hollywood Branch stream flowing directly through it here. We'll zoom in a little bit more, give you a little bit more specifics about it. This is just under 13-acre parcel. It's mostly wooded. It's mostly in the Stream Valley buffer and floodplain for the Hollywood Branch here, and that hatched area on the graphic is a delineated wetland, so it's got some nice features in there too. You can see a little bit more specifically how it's adjacent to this floating bit of Cannon Road Local Park, and then just across Laurie Drive from Paint Branch Stream Valley Unit 5, which is what it'll become part of. In addition to that significant stretch of Hollywood Branch in the wetlands, there was a really nice stream restoration project here in 2015 that was part of the ICC mitigation projects. And county and park staff worked closely together on that. And in the follow-up to that, we realized that while this was a county-titled parcel, a lot of county staff thought that this was parkland, and it was not, in fact. So we went back and did some checking. It's been, it was originally platted as a conservation area when the neighborhood was developed in the 1960s. In the 70s, it became county-titled. Not sure exactly the process for that. And has been ever since. Looking at it and in discussions, everyone decided that this made more sense to be parkland, that it would be a sort of better suited to steward it, and also all of the attendant benefits for the on-site resources, but then downstream resources in the rest of the parks in the watershed. So we've worked with the county and agreed they're doing a no-cost conveyance. It will transfer title fully from the county to the commission, and we'll have it become part of the Paint Branch Stream Valley Park. And that is most of the information that we think we need to share today about it, and our request, keeping us moving along, is approval of Resolution 2296 to accept this conveyance from the county and have this become parkland. And with that, I will say thank you and see if there's any questions we can answer.
Are there questions, comments, or motion?
Just, I mean, is there any OBI affiliate associated with that?
We've got
Because
an
it is conservation, so.
Sure, we have an estimate for OBI. I think it's $1,500 to $1,700 potentially, and that's mostly for potential tree inspections or work. It's heavily wooded, and there's homes that back up to it.
Okay, so if nobody has anything, I'll move approval of the acquisition.
Jerry Sushi, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we are back and ready for item 6, which is Block F Kilmarock Administrative Subdivision Plan with Katie McCready.
All right, good morning. For the record, Katie Mencarini, Down County Planning, presenting Administrative Subdivision Plan 6, 2022, 0050, Kilmarock Block F, which seeks to create 2 lots for 1 single-family detached dwelling unit on each lot. Staff recommends approval of the administrative subdivision with the conditions enumerated in the staff report. The property is located within the 2000 East Silver Spring Master Plan area. Surrounding the site to the east, west, and south are lots that are generally smaller in size and contain single-family detached houses in the R60 zone. The Tacoma Park Preparatory School is located behind the site along the site's northern rear side, so right about in this area. The 35,852 square foot property zoned R60 is located on the north side of Prospect Street between Barron Street and Glenside Drive. It has a Tacoma address, but it is outside the city proper limits. The city is currently improved, or sorry, not the city, the site is currently improved with a single-family detached dwelling unit with a masonry garage, swimming pool, and tennis court. The administrative subdivision plan, shown illustratively on the screen, seeks to subdivide the subject property into 2 lots, one detached unit on each lot. On Lot A, which is shown on the left side of the screen, will include the existing dwelling unit on 20,669 square feet. It will also contain the masonry garage and the tennis courts in the rear. Lot B will have a new dwelling unit on a 15,198 square foot lot. The swimming pool is to be removed. During staff's review of the revised forest conservation exemption application related to this application, staff determined that there are 2 environmentally sensitive areas on the site. One is the Stream Valley Buffer located within the northwest corner of Lot A, showing that with this light blue line here. The second are the steep slopes at the rear of Lot B. Section 43K B2 of Chapter 50 allows the board to require a building restriction line, which must be shown on the plat to protect floodplains and other environmentally sensitive or unsafe building areas on the site. Section 43K B4 of that same chapter specifies that any building restriction line must provide at least a 25-foot setback between any building and unsafe area. Therefore, as conditioned, staff recommends 2 building restriction lines in accordance with Chapter 50. So the first would be this 25-foot setback offset of the Stream Valley Buffer on Lot A, shown with this dash line here, and then a 150-foot BRL from the rear property line to protect the steep slopes in Lot B, shown with this dash line here. Staff has worked within the confines of the subdivision regulations and Chapter 28 of the County Code, which covers forest conservation and trees, to ensure protection of these environmentally sensitive areas while allowing for reasonable future development on the proposed lots. It should be noted that the applicant is not in agreement with staff's recommended conditions of approval pertaining to the building restriction lines on Lot A specifically. The applicant is here today and prepared to share their concerns after this presentation.
I'm sorry, Ms. Mancarini, can you, where is the tennis court compared to
Sure, the tennis court is actually within that Stream Valley Buffer and the 20-foot BRL. So it's roughly
but
here.
that can remain, and
Yes.
but it would be for future development that would not allow, and maybe they can just make it a pickleball court. That would be
For
better.
sure, yeah, maybe make it a little smaller. Yeah, I didn't point it out in my presentation, but thank you for drawing attention to it. This gray area would show pretty much the developable area if this were approved.
Yeah, I always thought that shelter thing, that swimming thing that
Oh,
we
the
had
bubbles?
on the agenda a week or 2 ago, whether that could be put in place.
It's a substantial area. I think it could accommodate lots of different ideas. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we hear from the applicant about this, because that seems to be the, oh, I'm sorry, were you done with the?
Just one more.
Oh,
I'll-
okay.
I'll
Go
be super
ahead.
fast
Sorry.
as usual. No problem. Okay. So the administrative subdivision plan meets the technical requirements of the subdivision ordinance as shown in the staff report, and the 2000 East Silver Spring master plan is conditioned. Applicant has met all signage and noticing requirements. Staff has received no correspondence from the community to date. Staff recommends approval with the conditions of the administrative subdivision plan as enumerated in the staff report. And then now this ends my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Didn't mean to jump the gun there, but since there appears to be an issue that's really the beginning, middle, and end of the controversy, maybe we could hear from the applicant on this building restriction line issue.
Good morning. This is Russell Reese with Wiles Mensch, representing the applicant, who's also on the call, Mr. Ron Goodman. Ron also lives in the existing house on proposed Lot A. Also available is Mike Norton, who prepared the forest conservation exemption plan. So if there's any specific questions for him. Katie just mentioned that we objected to the BRL on Lot A. It's actually Lot B that we object to. The BRL on Lot A is okay. I think Mr. Goodman's plans for the rear of the property are not extensive, and that grayed out area would be adequate for any future improvements. The bigger concern for us is the rather draconian 150-foot building restriction line shown on Lot B. One, that shaded area in orange that's, at least on my screen right now, is the steeply sloped portion in the rear of Lot B. Now, this area is actually, it's not natural slope. I mean, this was slope that was obviously created when the tennis court was constructed many years ago. You know, it was a slightly higher piece of ground that they cut into to make a flat surface for that tennis court. So there's some question as to whether that should even be categorized in the same breadth as a steep slope that would be part of an adjacent stream buffer, as is the case on the other side of the property. So the 150 foot, and again, these are areas outside of my expertise, so perhaps Mike Norton can be asked some questions when it comes to that, but there was a couple things in the staff report that were of issue to us that pertain to the 150 foot BRL. And, you know, principally, the description in the staff report describes multiple special trees or significantly sized trees, and there's really only two in the whole NRI-FSD that are actually within the boundaries of this property for both lots. Most of the significant trees out here are on the adjacent properties. And, you know, also on, I think it's page 10 of the staff report, you know, staff kind of already says that they support the revised layout. Originally, we should fill you in that originally there was a proposal that had a new house built in the rear of what is shown now as Lot B. And that was completely revised and the house site brought down towards the road with a limited disturbance that's actually in front of this proposed 150-foot BRL. And there's a paragraph on page 10 where the staff says they support the revised layout described in this report, which will provide adequate protection of the on-site environmentally sensitive features and tree protection measures for impacts to specimen trees resulting from shifting Lot B from the rear of the property as shown in the initial submission that I referred to, and its proposed location as described in this report. No mention made of BRLs making that protection necessary. And it's the applicant's position that this 150-foot BRL is an unreasonable restriction and an effect on the value of the usability of this property moving forward. We would also remind everybody that any proposed improvements to the rear of this lot would have to go through a permitting process that would include a necessary revision to an approved tree save plan and an approved stormwater management concept plan, both of which set an LOD that we can't violate. So we just don't see the need for the 150-foot BRL, and we feel it's an improper overreach by staff to impose a 150-foot rear BRL on an R60 lot.
Chair, could we hear from Mr. Norton? And I appreciate the recent testimony, but I think the person that just spoke suggested that there was a subject matter expert that could address the commentary regarding the steep slope.
Sure. I do want to direct everybody, applicant, staff, board, and anyone else who is paying attention to, you know, just the discussion of what the legal standards are here. Certainly we can hear from Mr. Norton, but I just want to make sure we stay focused on what is the appropriate way to review this under the code and relevant regulations. But we can hear from Mr. Norton.
Good morning, everyone. It's Mike Norton at Norton Land Design, for the record. I'm not sure what, Russ, you wanted me to add to this, other than the steep slopes, like you had stated, appear to be in concert with the tennis court itself. There's two specimen trees on the rear of the property. That's where we are. I thought I was here for some questions if people had them. I really can't add too much more to what Russ has said at the minute.
Okay, maybe we could hear from our attorney about what the how this works as far as the stream buffer and the steep
I
slopes.
Well, that I can speak to. I can tell you about the stream valley buffer. I can't share my screen, but the stream valley buffer, as delineated on the plan right now, goes through the tennis court as described by one of the board members earlier. The stream valley buffer, when it does encroach steep slopes, the idea is that the stream valley buffer goes around the steep slopes to include them. The stream valley buffer does not intersect the steep slopes on the, I'm just going to use plan east, plan right, if you will, on what we're looking at right now, does not intercept the steep slopes on the right side of the tennis court. Therefore, it is not included in the stream valley buffer itself.
Okay, thank you for that. Could we hear from legal on this?
Of course. This is Allison Myers from the legal department. So this ability for the board to impose a building restriction line comes from, as staff mentioned, this comes from the subdivision code from chapter 50. And it's section 4.3.K, point 2.B. And what it does, it allows the board to impose a building restriction line to protect environmentally sensitive areas, or it uses also unsafe land. So I know the applicant raised the point that, potentially the steep slopes are a result of the tennis court construction, but I don't know that this section, nor the environmental guidelines, perhaps environmental planner staff could comment on that, but I don't know whether there is any distinction really between whether it's naturally occurring steep slopes or steep slopes as a result of construction. It just allows the board to impose a restriction, a minimum, it says, of 25 feet from the unsafe area, but it doesn't set a maximum. It allows the board discretion to determine what's appropriate in order to allow proper drainage or just proper separation from environmentally sensitive or unsafe areas.
Could I ask a slide that shows the this property or the lines, particularly with this 150-foot, the building restriction line, to see what the natural, like, kind of like a satellite view that you would get, so I have a clearer vision. Because the question that I have, or the way that I would look at this as a analogy, is that the board has taken the position that in forest conservation easements, we want to prohibit we don't want to put easements in there that are so restrictive that a homeowner does not get the use of their backyard. So I want to see how that would impact, because I look at this as a similar analogy. Is the building restriction line, would it get to the effect where it's so large, or the 150 feet, would that essentially effectively prohibit the use of their property and to have a decent backyard when they're ultimately build the house?
So this slide, I apologize that I don't have the aerial for you on top of it. I appreciate that. So what we're showing here is this is outside of their LOD, and it does create a pretty substantial backyard in which if they wanted to put an accessory structure, it doesn't mean they can't use their backyard or can't access it. It just means that they can't put a permanent structure, which given, and I defer to my colleague Saquon Gatling, who's sitting at the front here, I don't think they would really be able to build on it anyways with steep slopes. So, I'm a little confused by this feedback, if my face isn't obvious. When we were talking about this with the applicant before, it was really focusing on Lot A. There was some, potential about wanting to build some structures back there, so that's hence why we focused on there and tried to demonstrate how large of an area you can build on there. Lot B, this is an illustrative design of a house, but it's a substantial house, still with room for a garage, say, or a shed, or anything else that they want to put back there.
And their kids could play in the backyard?
100%, yeah. Yeah, in fact, I would think that you could even put a sandbox or, like other recreational type things back there that wouldn't necessarily need a permit for a permanent structure. So yeah, it doesn't mean that you can't walk back there or landscape or garden or do anything like that.
I mean,
So
looking.
it's not like a category 1.
No, no, in fact, that's what we were weighing. We wanted to make sure, if hopefully it was clear in the staff report, we were saying we want to make sure that we're being clear about what the needs are for the environmental concerns while giving reasonable development and use of the property. And we did look at an easement and thought that would be too restrictive. And so that's where we thought this made sense and this was a reasonable recommendation to make for you.
I mean,
Thank you.
I'm looking at the graphic right now and just eyeballing it. That looks like a 30 to 45 foot backyard, which is pretty good, especially for new construction. So, does the applicant want to explicitly state what the issue is and why this doesn't work out for them?
Jerry.
Hold on. Ron, you may want to,
Yeah, you want to answer?
you may want to respond to this directly?
I did say-
Yeah, what, I think we'd like to know what it is that is, as a practical matter, what's the problem here? It looks like you can put a house in the front of the lot. So what are we really talking about?
Okay, well, before I get Ron to respond, just a couple things for the record. No one's questioning the board's right to impose a BRL under the section cited. We question whether this applies, the conditions of that section apply as it relates to designating this an environmentally sensitive area, because it certainly doesn't qualify as unsafe land per the environmental design regulations. Because that all has to do with the soil type, we don't need to get into that minutia. Basically, the objection here was that a 150-foot building restriction line could affect the value of this property for a potential buyer. We have no specific plans to make an improvement in the back. It's just that, you create quite a limitation on the rear of this lot. And the applicant's position is that it's not for an adequate reason. And if Ron, if you want to add to that, please feel free.
No, I mean, I would say the same thing, that it certainly limits the value, and it seems to me there's a permitting process anyway, that anything that would have to be put up there would have to go before you anyway to buy a permit. I don't understand why it's restricted. And, and that slope, I mean, that slope to me is, again, it's not an unsafe piece of property. And, I'm doing a lot to take care of trees there and working with the people at Potomac Conference behind there that have vines and stuff killing trees back there. I'm trying to help save all those trees. I just don't understand why there should be a restriction. And I don't see this part of the backyard as an unsafe area, as Russ said. So I just think that I don't understand why we can't just let the permitting process in the future be what it is.
Well, I'm sorry, but the permitting process is not going to act as a limitation on this.
Yeah, just looking at the aerial photo that was shown, it looked like that where on this map it shows 150 foot in the BRL. That is kind of clear. It might be, can't tell whether it's sloped, but is there any option to move the BRL back to, say, the corner point on the right of the property line? That would match the gray, basically match the gray on the other side. If you went across there, yeah.
Jerry, I think that's the applicant's position, but
Yeah.
the question is that a good idea?
I mean, I think that you would want to make sure that it's 25 feet offset of this orange area, which, I mean, would probably be back a little bit further. If that's what you would prefer, we would be fine with that. We just thought that given some of the other environmentally sensitive areas, this is where we drew our line, but we're here for you.
I think 25 feet off the orange area is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It's probably not really that much different than what we're seeing here, but if that helps you out. I mean, I don't think there's any question that the authority is there, and I guess it's within our discretion, but I think that's discretion we're supposed to exercise when it limits the development, the ability to develop the lot, and it's pretty clear you can develop this lot.
Yeah, I agree that maybe moving the BRL back a little bit, but I don't. I'm not swayed by the argument made by the applicant with regard to the value, because if it's going to be restricted by permit, we're only talking about the construction of improvements back there, and if it's going to be restricted by permit, then I would prefer to have it clear to anybody who's purchasing the property
up front, that they know where they can and can't build. And I think from an enforcement perspective, it makes more sense to put the BRL on the plat so that there's no question of potential violation at a later date in the case. It just won't be missed. So unless anybody else has anything, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Well, I think the suggestion was to do it 25 feet south of the orange areas, and if that's acceptable, I would want to make that motion.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I will make that motion to adjust this, to move that, as suggested, 25 feet from the orange area. It will go beyond the gray on the left, but that seems to be acceptable.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's approved. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All right, we are back for item 9, the pedestrian master plan draft design policy and programming recommendations review with Eli Glazier.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Members of the board, for the record, my name is Eli Glazier, and I am a transportation planner in the Countywide Planning and Policy Division. I'm joined today by my colleague, David Ansbacher, and we are really excited to present to you our draft policy design and programming recommendations as part of the pedestrian master plan for your review and feedback. Today, I think the roadmap for the presentation today is just what is the plan, a refresher for folks who we haven't been here in a little bit, to share with them more information, the types of recommendations that are going to be in the plan, a deep dive into these higher level policy and design recommendations, a peek at a tool we have out with the community right now, this pedestrian prioritization tool, and then a screenshot of some of the equitable engagement efforts we've been working on over the course of the recommendations, sort of the publishing of the recommendations, a summary of some of the feedback we've gotten to date, and then really the path forward. So this plan, this is pulled really from the scope of work that we reviewed all the way back in 2019, is going to strengthen the existing culture of walking and expand it by prioritizing pedestrian infrastructure and recommending updates to county policies, operational practices, and design standards. So I think this sentence is really important because it lays out sort of our charge in this plan to make prioritization of pedestrian infrastructure, and then also to really think about these higher level things that make the pedestrian experience better. So I think this plan is not really like a traditional transportation master plan. It's not like the bicycle master plan where we've recommended specific bikeways on specific roads. It's really about thinking about the pedestrian experience in a really holistic way, to understand that it's not just about whether or not there are sidewalks. It's about some of these other things that are more rarely in the spotlight, like things like lighting and the potential to safely cross the street and things like that, that may not come sort of front of mind when we're thinking about pedestrian issues. So that's why the recommendations we're presenting today are really very important. The goals of this plan, as a refresher, number 1, increasing walking rates and pedestrian satisfaction. 2, creating this comfortable connected network for pedestrians. 3, making it safer for pedestrians, using this plan as a vehicle to help achieve Vision Zero countywide. And then 4 is doing all of those things in an equitable and just way. So being particularly thoughtful and diligent about where we're making recommendations for new pedestrian facilities, the conditions on the ground in certain communities in Montgomery County, and being really diligent about making updates to address those conditions. It's been a long road to get here, I think. We kicked off this plan in September 2019 with public engagement countywide. We have heard people all across the county share their pedestrian experiences, and we identified through that process some common threads that really tie the pedestrian experience together across the county. At the same time that was happening, we were really diligently collecting this existing conditions data, the pedestrian level of comfort analysis, the student travel tally we did with Montgomery County Public Schools, our countywide crash analysis, and our statistically valid countywide pedestrian survey. We brought that to you all in March of this year. And what we've done since then is really built on the combination of the baseline data from the existing conditions report and the public feedback that we got about the pedestrian experience in the county to begin to develop recommendations to address the issues that were identified. And the recommendations that are included in this plan are these high-level recommendations, the ones I'm mainly here to discuss today, these design, policy, and programming recommendations. The next set of recommendations is going to be an approach to using data to prioritize where pedestrian improvements are made countywide through both our processes at the planning department and then hopefully sort of in the capital improvements process for MCDOT and others. Third, I think these pedestrian shortcut locations, we're really well aware that in the county, sidewalks and trails may not provide that direct point A to point B connectivity that pedestrians want and I think people expect. So over time, the dirt paths have been created. People walk through grass to connect as the shortest path between these 2 points. And what we've done is we did an interactive data collection exercise with members of the community to figure out where these connections are that people are using. And then we supplemented that with some of our own work to figure out additional connections. And this section of recommendations will be about making essentially master plan recommendations for these connections that should be improved and made accessible. So turning a dirt path into a sidewalk. So it's an all-weather facility. It's accessible for people of all sort of ages and abilities. Creating stairs on steep slopes and things like that, just to make the pedestrian network as direct as possible so people can choose pedestrian trips over some other driving or maybe not taking trips at all, things like that. The next set of recommendations is going to be about making side paths, sort of recommending side paths in some of our more rural areas. Side paths are sort of the shared bicycle pedestrian facilities to improve connectivity in the more rural parts of our county. And then the last bit here is a Complete Streets Design Guide area technical translation, which is essentially this plan making some required clarifications about how different parts of the county are categorized for the Complete Streets Design Guide, which is the collaborative document that we've put together with the Department of Transportation. The end result of that technical translation will allow us to ensure that as projects happen and as public development happens, that the roadways in those areas are really reimagined in sort of a maximally pedestrian-friendly way, so we can sort of jumpstart the change that we need to see as part of this plan. But the recommendations I'm mainly here to talk to you today are about these design policy and programming recommendations, which are, I think, high-level recommendations that if they were implemented today wouldn't change the county into a more pedestrian-friendly place overnight. But as sidewalks are built, as intersections are reimagined, as street lighting is maintained, we're going to see some pretty dramatic changes across the county in a really systemic way as these recommendations are implemented. The recommendations are broken out into 6 themes. These themes are pretty straightforward. Build is about building things. Maintain is about ensuring that what we've built remains usable for years to come. Protect is about making pedestrians safer. Expand access is a suite of recommendations about improving accessibility for people of all ages and abilities. Monitor is a set of recommendations about keeping us as a planning department honest and the county honest in terms of transparency about how we're implementing this plan and the progress that we're making in creating a more pedestrian-friendly Montgomery County. And then fund is a few recommendations that builds on the understanding that we've really underinvested in sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure for decades now. And the county obviously has a lot of different funding priorities, and we may need to be creative about ways to make up that deficit in investment in these things. So just some ideas that we have about making recommendations to address that deficit. So within these 6 themes, there are 34 recommendations. And within those 34 recommendations, there are 94 key actions that, when implemented, will achieve the recommendation intent. I think the way to think about these are the recommendations are like a quick takeaway that summarizes what we're trying to achieve. And the key actions are really the more technical pieces about how you would implement and achieve that recommendation. So they're all recommendations. It's just sort of a hierarchy of recommendations. The draft recommendations are available on our website. They were translated professionally into Spanish and into Mandarin. So people have had the opportunity, if they speak other languages, to access those resources. And then we've also had a fairly active, I would say, public feedback form through our website for people to provide feedback on this, and I'll summarize sort of later in the presentation some of the feedback that we've gotten to date. But at this point, I was going to walk through, because there's so many recommendations and so many key actions, what I was going to do is walk through and pick a couple of recommendations from each theme, and then at the end we can circle back and there'll be an index slide and we can dive into other ones if commissioners are interested. So I'm going to go ahead and do that in the interest of time. These are the build recommendations. I think some of these are sort of a bigger lift than others. I think the one that's timely and kind of in the news today, given the sort of the T&E committee hearing and sort of the full council briefing about Vision Zero, is building sidewalks faster, B1. I think this recommendation lays out several key actions that address issues that may have that exist in the current sidewalk construction process, from pivoting from a more reactive data-driven request-driven process to a more of an equitable data-driven process for figuring out where sidewalks should be constructed, as well as reimagining the public engagement process around sidewalk construction to really change the conversation from whether or not a sidewalk should be built to how a sidewalk should be built, really being clear that sidewalks are really essential infrastructure and not like a luxury for a community to have. So it's really not it shouldn't be up for debate or interpretation whether or not something like that should be built, more just using local knowledge about trees and other sort of potential impacts to design them in a very thoughtful, context-sensitive way. There's some other recommendations in here, some other key actions in this specific recommendation about ensuring that as we're building new public buildings, so schools, rec centers, other things, they're being built in a pedestrian-friendly way where pedestrians don't need to walk through the parking lot, for instance, to access the front of the building, making it easier for people to access our public buildings, and really leading by example in pedestrian-friendly design when it comes to the public infrastructure that we as a county are building. So that's some examples from.
Mr. Ilger,
Yes.
would that include, when you talk about accessibility, getting from the neighborhoods that are using those public buildings that they're intended for, to get access to them, not just in the parking lots? It's, in other words, to encourage more walking in a community so that they can easily access the particular public building for whatever use is designed.
Yeah, so I think as it's written now, the intent is more specifically about the immediate site design, but I think that you bring up a good point that we've had conversations with other agencies like MCPS in the past about the need to sort of expand in the neighborhood and consider sort of the mandate to improve access beyond the frontage. So I think we can make some edits to the recommendation.
Yeah, I definitely would like to see that, because I think, you know, some of the, and I don't want to jump in early on your presentation, but, you know, when you talked about the schools, you know, creating these special bus, I forgot what you called it, but walking school
buses,
things like that. I think, and we've talked a lot when we look at, in our mandatory referrals on school buildings, that it's really important, and we want to encourage kids to walk to school or ride their bikes. And you can't do that unless it's in a safe environment. And I think we want to do that for not only health reasons, but also to get some cars off the road, to reduce, you know. And so I think that would go well with any public building, that we make sure that we're providing access from a community so that they can actually get there, walking, biking, rolling, whatever it is.
We agree.
Can I make just one
Sure.
quick
Yeah.
observation? And first of all, I think these build recommendations are spot on. I mean, I looked at every single one of them, and I think they address exactly what we need to do in this county. B1 is particularly important, I think, build more sidewalks faster, and just expanding on that. And I've said this in previous meetings and in other contexts, but I'll say it here again, is do you think you could also specify or even create as another bullet point within B1 that we can start identifying smaller projects that we know that can be built on a quicker manner? So some of the reasons for delay in this county is that the entire, like for instance, a larger project may take longer because it requires more design, but there may be a need to have a sidewalk connection, that low-hanging fruit that we know just that one small section, even though it may be part of a larger project, if we just got that done, and maybe it's cheaper, maybe it's faster, there's a highly likelihood that that would get done and that would change the pedestrian experience in a way that the people in Montgomery County would react and say, oh, wow, okay, that was quick. I mean, I still think it's kind of tragic that we still don't have a sidewalk connection to what I think was voted at one point the worst bus stop in America on Route 29. Is it Burton Mills community? And, you know, why is that done? I'm sure there's some reasons. I mean, the grading and retaining wall, it looks like it's a complicated space. Nevertheless, that would be a great project to look at and say, like, okay, why can't we connect it? We have now a park connection where people can access to trails, but we still don't have a connection to that bus stop. So these are things that I think if you could mention, because I think in this county, we do often analyze things and take a long time to do the kind of design for projects, but there are, and I'm sure constituents know this better than anyone, small CIP projects that probably even MCDOT can get done that would make a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that actually is the intent of Key Action B1A here. I think where the annual sidewalk program gets bogged down today, which is that program that is supposed to do those really easy sidewalk projects without much engineering work at all. Where it gets bogged down today is apparently there's a bottleneck we learned this week in terms of how those projects are evaluated. There's also a large funding constraint. There's much more demand than the availability to build those sidewalks. But I think the more sort of the larger issue here is that program is reactive. So you end up, even if you're prioritizing a reactive process in a way that includes equity or includes other metrics, you're still only prioritizing projects that people have requested. And we know that there are many communities in this county that may not be requesting sidewalks or may not be calling 411 or doing whatever, but they have very real needs, and in most cases their needs may exceed the needs of the people that are making the requests. So B1A is about pivoting this program, this quick build for government program, from that reactive request-driven process to a more forward-thinking, equitable, data-driven one, where we can look at areas of the county based on the priorities that we're hopefully going to set as part of this pedestrian plan, and we can pair that with our pedestrian level of comfort, and we know where sidewalk gaps are all across the county, and we can identify these are the sidewalk gaps in these high priority areas. Let's use this program. Let's evaluate the feasibility of those sidewalk connections. Let's look at, do they require, and would it be a more complicated process? And if not, let's just build those sidewalks quickly in those really high priority areas. So that's really at the heart of B1A, is being more data driven and using the resources that we have, the limited resources, in sort of the highest impact way to make those connections that you're talking about.
Yeah, and obviously the implementation piece is really important. I mean, what you just outlined is great, but we just need to make sure our partners are on the same page. Because to your point, there are inequities. I mean, certain communities are more vocal. You can see it in the way they have sidewalk connections or street calming, traffic calming measures that are put in their neighborhoods that are much, it's a different pedestrian experience in other parts of the county. And you're right, it's because of how people are participating. I have more comments, but I'm going to let you continue your
I think
your
we'll have plenty. I think we have a lot of time for this item, so happy to
No,
talk
please
more
continue.
later.
Oh, go ahead.
I can't help but comment, if I may. I was at MCDOT, and one of the things we did was we had the ability to do quick take on property, and I assume that MCDOT still has that. And I had a right-of-way guy, George Mossberger, that we worked with developers, and if the development was large enough, they were in the middle of a block, assessing their total cost of the project, we would say, we want you to make the connection. We would use our quick take to deal with the individual property owners with this, George, as if the people want a bush or a wall, as you put the sidewalk in, just put it in there. We also worked with State Highway, where WSSC, if we had a road project or a sidewalk project, but it meant moving a WSSC pipe, we would even include that in our design. And depending on the cost to put the sidewalk in and move the pipe, we would put that in the sidewalk project. So to me, your statement about quick takeaway, MCDOT, I think, has that authority. And I think it could be used to, if you have a mid-block project, you make that connection to where there are, the signal crossing or the sidewalk crossing. Again, I totally agree with the bus rapid transit. We did that on Shoulders on 29 back 40 years ago. But again, I drive down Veers Mill Road, and there are bus stops that get put in. Sometimes maybe, the WMATA puts them in. But if they get put in, seems to me you're encouraging people to cross there, and you really ought to go with the judgment on the crosswalk, and then whether, obviously, the volume of ridership there or connectivity, that a signal's required. The other thing, too, it just, again, Old Montrose Road, now we have Josiah Henson Parkway, so traffic is up. But I still see signs, and I know it's a state law that says stop for pedestrians in the crosswalk. And so you got to put your foot in there to get a car to stop. Rather to say state law, maybe that's the change, maybe it's too much, but stop for pedestrians at the crosswalk. You know, a bunch of kids dancing on the edge of the crosswalk, but when you see people that are there ready to cross, there's an element of that. Now, I know people are not good at coming to full stops at stop signs, but again, I think that would be a safety. But again, using the quick take to do the things that you want to do. I know money is always a problem, but sometimes on the more major developers, it fit within their cost, and it gave their tenants or their commercial space better access. So I think using that quick take is important. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just go through a couple more of the build recommendations. I think the main thing, I mean, people across the county in our survey and in our in-person work wanted more sidewalks and crossings, but I think another really important thing that they wanted was just better lighting. I think it's really hard. That was sort of one of the most important things we heard, was the need for improved pathway lighting, the need for improved intersection lighting, even from people that called themselves drivers. Like you need visibility at intersections for everyone using those intersections. So we have some recommendations in here to do that. Improve shade along pedestrian pathways. From our existing conditions report, we looked at shade and found that in our equity focus areas, all things being equal, the shade in those areas was worse than in the rest of the county. So creating a program that prioritizes improving shade along pathways in the equity focus areas in the county. I think another really big recommendation here that we've gotten a lot of positive comments back from members of the public, and I think some skepticism about how it would happen, is this B10 recommendation, which is assuming county control of state highways. I think the specifics of this, the recommendation says to develop a plan to assume control of state roadways in downtowns, town centers, and along master plan bus rapid transit corridors. And I think the logic here, where we're coming from, is that these are the roads in the county that have the most things that pedestrians want to access. They're also the most dangerous roads in the county. And it is very, I think, frustrating for members of the public, and then also for staff, when we get a request from a member of the public to work to improve a road like this, to say, oh, well, that's a state road. To us, to me personally, and I think to members of the public, it really seems like we're passing the buck and passing responsibility on some of these roads. And it's a really frustrating experience for us, and it's a frustrating experience for members of the public. So I think for two reasons, this is an important recommendation. One, I think moving these roads in some of the most theoretically walkable parts of our community to county control would allow us as a county to have more flexibility, obviously, in how they're redesigned, how they're reimagined, in line with the Complete Streets Design Guide. So they can become more walkable, they can become easier and faster bus connections across the county. And then also, I think there is an element of sort of good governance and accountability here, where for these roads, there is just one entity responsible. You know that if you're dealing with Georgia Avenue in Silver Spring or Flower Avenue in sort of Tacoma, it's us, it's the county government. And I think there's a real value there. I think this recommendation is really not intended to solve the massive logistical, bureaucratic hurdles that would be responsible or need to happen for this to be achieved. I think the goal of this recommendation is really just to start the conversation and to create a shared understanding that the current system really isn't working. And it would be a good opportunity and help us to reimagine and actually make progress on the goals of this plan and Vision Zero, et cetera, if those roads were under more county control. So that's the idea for that.
Can I comment on that too? Again, I was at the state and at MDOT and MDOT. But again, you need to look at the allocation of funds out of the Maryland Transportation Trust Fund, and allocations are made to the local jurisdictions. If you look at the one that gets about 35% of that is the city of Baltimore, because technically they have no state highways. And in fact, even two senators were successful in getting federal legislation that the tolls collected at the Harbor Tunnel, not the Harbor Tunnel, but the one through downtown. They had an interstate division in the city that did the interstates, but that one they couldn't come up with the money to do the tunnel, the 10% share. So that's kind of what the tolls were directed at. They get 90% federal funds for the tunnel, but the city had to come up with the tolls, and 10%, the toll covers the 10%. But again, there's the issue that doing that, but again, it could affect the allocation to the county. But again, when I was there, we did Great Seneca. We took it out of engineering, we moved it to planning, got the federal approval, then went back to, but I think the state took it over. It's now Maryland 117, and anything with a number on it is a state road. Correct. We did play with the state. If they put a new road in, they abandoned a little old road, we took it over. That was a commitment. They upgraded Randolph Road, and we took it over. So, I mean, it's negotiating with that. Present administration, future administrations may be more open to discussing that, and you may or may not want to take them over. But again, with Quick Take, we used Quick Take. I was doing sidewalks on Connecticut Avenue, which is a state highway. So where that was needed, we were able to do it with permission of the state. So, I mean, it's a better working relationship. District 3 State Highway is in Greenbelt. And we worked with the chief engineer there on projects and came to consensus. And we never involved a lot of elected officials either. So, I mean, I think taking a look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Glazier,
Sure.
in looking, and I'm glad you provided that explanation regarding B10 of the list that's here, that's the one that gave me pause. And I think part of it is some of the points that you've touched upon in terms of the long-term operations and maintenance if we were to take or assume control. I'm going to back away from that. What I also wanted to ask you your thoughts, and Mr. Anspacher, if you want to weigh in, regarding the conflict and intersection between B5, B6, and B8. In some ways, they support one another. In other ways, they conflict. And you guys have heard me say this before. I'm all about lighting the pathways, but when we also talk about we want to shade the pedestrian pathways, let's make sure we're not causing a conflict with the lighting of the pathways, which is frequently reducing the natural barrier. The natural barrier sometimes is we've got the lighting. The lighting is being obfuscated by the shade. So I'd like to hear how you guys thought this through. And I know they're listed separately, but again, there's conflict and there's intersection.
100%. For the record, Dave Anspacher. We talk about this all the time. I think as we've mentioned in previous planning board items, we do have a grant with the Council of Governments to upgrade the county's lighting standards, looking at, among other things, the spacing of lighting poles. We certainly understand that there are, if the spacing of trees and the spacing of lighting, they can be in conflict. So one of the items that we have talked about is getting a better understanding and tying together our street design guidelines with our the lighting standards that come out. So at least moving forward as we're planning new and developing new communities, that they can be aligned appropriately.
And for the record, Gwen Wright, Planning Director. That's also one of the reasons with most of our major plans that we do, we follow up with streetscape standards so that we can talk about in downtown Bethesda or downtown Silver Spring or downtown Wheaton how the streetscapes can work to have wide enough sidewalks so that if you put in lights and trees, you aren't going to still create barriers to walking and rolling, and how you can correctly space lights and trees to try to avoid conflicts. So I think that these are all really important recommendations, but they need a, everything is woven together. It sort of also involves urban design and how you do streetscape standards that really achieve these goals.
I'd like to add, were you? Okay. I would like to add one comment to B10, which going back to the control of state highways, because I didn't hear you talk about access, control, and plans. I recall when there was construction, particularly in the more urban areas, you have very limited area for construction staging, things of that nature. And I've found in the past that the state doesn't really think in terms of pedestrian access during construction potentially in the way that the county does. And I think that it's really important. I recall many times where the temporary pedestrian access during construction has been very difficult. And many times, I recall I was almost hit by cars many times because I had no other place to go but in the street during the construction. And so I want to just make sure you add that to the discussion of why it's important for to have more local control of those state highways, because we think more in terms of those, and that's an important issue to deal with. So I appreciate that. And also I would say that I've served on several task forces, and I've always said nobody cares which government you're working with. They just want it done. So it's like, it doesn't matter. And so deflecting it and saying, well, that's not our responsibility is not the way to go for government. So good government just tries to resolve all the problems together. So I appreciate that comment that you made.
So that's one of the two reasons I think we're thinking about doing this.
I just comment on both the last one. But again, the issue came, there was a project to put trees along Georgia Avenue, as I recall, and high trees, low trees, and the lighting, as Gwen mentioned. And the issue that came up with the suburban district, which is maintaining the trees, is trees touching and whether the disease goes from tree to tree. So again, if you're working with MCDOT, the issue of the suburban district is the one that in part maintains some of those trees. And so that's something to consider where you go with that.
I think in the interest of time, I'm going to move along. I guess ideally we would hold more questions till the end. But in the maintain category, again, just making sure our pedestrian infrastructure is in a state of good repair. I think the main recommendation here is about being more proactive about fixing sidewalks, really similar to the building sidewalks, but in other communities around the country, they proactively inspect sidewalks on an annual sort of rotating basis, checking to note like where deficiencies exist and then coming back and addressing those deficiencies. I think one of the benefits of this is that it allows sidewalks to be fixed before they deteriorate to the degree where it would require a more expensive solution. The other piece of this, again, going back to equity, is that it doesn't require a 311 request to get a sidewalk repair. We have a good idea of where the issues are, and it's being fixed and addressed in a reasonable amount of time. MA2 here is a set of recommendations about keeping sidewalks and curb ramps clear, so things like snow removal, vegetation removal, trash receptacles, things like that. And then MA3, I think, is about, this picture on this slide is my foot in a utility cut by our old office. Essentially using roadway maintenance and sidewalk maintenance projects or utility projects as opportunities to provide upgrades to crosswalks and sidewalks and things like that. And making sure that projects like the one shown on the screen where they don't do that, there are penalties and enforcement for ensuring that sidewalks are brought up to the state of repair that they were in before. So I'll keep moving. The protect recommendations, I think, are very important, obviously, in helping to achieve Vision Zero. The big recommendation here, the overall sort of meta recommendation, is trying to grapple with an important element of the pedestrian safety crisis, which is large vehicles that have poor pedestrian visibility. So really tall trucks and SUVs. So P1 includes recommendations, a suite of recommendations about this. A few of them are for really the county to lead by example. So ensuring that we're buying vehicles that are safe for pedestrians, ensuring that county vehicles and vehicles operated by public agencies like ourselves have speed governors or other intelligent speed management installed, so drivers are adhering to the speed limits. And then P1C is developing a strategy to work with fire and EMS to purchase sort of more nimble emergency vehicles that can navigate narrower streets and tighter curb radii while maintaining the appropriate performance standards to sort of fight fires and other things. But doing that would allow our street designs to get a little bit more constrained, which would improve walkability and reduce exposure for people that are trying to cross streets. And then the last two pieces here are sort of outward facing and would require sort of assistance at the state level. But I think P1D is understanding that these larger vehicles that are operated by sort of consumers across the state and across the country have really demonstrated pedestrian safety challenges. I think there have been news articles, and there's a visual in the document that we shared that shows sort of the blind spots, the massive blind spots that these vehicles have. And this recommendation is about developing legislation to carve out a new type of driver's license between sort of the standard driver's license that we have that you would operate like a sedan or a minivan or something with, from like the commercial driver's license, like the tractor trailer type license, to have sort of a license in between that provides more training and education for people driving these larger SUVs and trucks, so that we can help mitigate some of the sort of dangerous issues that they present.
Have you considered maybe instead of that, just adding to the driver's ed, the required driver's ed that kids or new drivers go through, that instead of a new license or a new class of automobile, just having more training to people who are getting their license or renewing their license that would, add to that the training for everyone, because I think that's probably a easier pill to swallow.
Yeah, I think so. That's related to P1E, which is essentially latching on to that issue where you may get your driver's license and then not really have to stay up to date on traffic laws or new infrastructure for decades and decades and decades. So this is a recommendation to improve the renewal process by implementing, I think in the rationale in the document, it says a non-punitive, non-failable knowledge test requirement. So when you are renewing, rather than just like checking the box and getting your license, there could be some education about what's changed since your last renewal, so that you can be more knowledgeable on the road.
Yeah, I was talking more about 1D. I think it's going to be a harder sell.
Sure, yeah, 100%.
But I think that you can combine those in not just the renewal process, but in the knowledge, in the actual lessons to train new drivers as well at the very beginning in pedestrian safety and visibility concerns.
I don't think we disagree. I think the challenge is that in a lot of ways the horse is already out of the barn when it comes to these vehicles, and I think there are benefits 100% to improving the quality and sort of breadth of initial driver education, but we're in the middle of a crisis that I think is largely precipitated by these larger vehicles. So we're just trying to be creative about approaches, identifying sort of issues and pitfalls in the current regime. But I think that's a good comment.
Mr. Glazier, I had a question regarding P1C. Based on your research and developing this key action, are there jurisdictions where this has been successful? My concern with literally telling our emergency management team, go and get a new vehicle. Fire trucks can cost several $1 million depending on how that fire truck or emergency vehicle is loaded. So do you have examples where this has been successful, where there's been best practices that literally that jurisdiction has benefited? I know most jurisdictions try to let that asset depreciate as long as possible, and I hear what you're saying regarding the tighter curb radii, but the vehicle that is usually sent out is based on the request, and whether it's chemicals or something else, they'll send out the appropriate vehicle. So I'll pause because I see you guys giving each other the eye.
Yeah, no, I pulled up, I think that's a good point, and I think this recommendation and the key action, the intent is not a wholesale sort of swap of the fleet, but just like as needs arise that we would consider smaller vehicles. I think what we've seen in the United States, we've seen communities like San Francisco and Los Angeles beginning to invest in smaller vehicles that have very similar, identical functionality to larger vehicles, but they're in a smaller package. In many cases, they're also electrified, so they don't have emissions. And I think those are the two United States examples that are in the in Attachment A, but smaller vehicles are the predominant emergency and fire vehicles in the rest of the world. So I know, and I think we're well aware on our staff that there are unique requirements for the United States and the state of Maryland, et cetera, but I think there are opportunities to use a smaller design vehicle and achieve the same benefits and the same responsiveness and things like that. So that's what we're saying.
Okay, let's look for some jurisdictions on the East Coast as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay. There's some other, recommendations in here about improving protected crossing locations. Commissioner Cici had alluded to Veers Mill, where there may be bus stops without safe crossing locations. So there's a recommendation or a key action in here. Never mind, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Nope, sorry. To essentially evaluate where our bus stops are and where the crossings are and making sure that they're co-located. So whether that involves adding a crossing location or moving a bus stop, that's something that should be done. I think we agree that it doesn't make a lot of sense from a safety perspective to have a bus stop that you have to cross at an unsignalized, uncontrolled. Yeah, I think there's some larger issues that have to be dealt with WMATA as well. But yeah, I think it's just the trade-off between having the stop spacing that you want with the number of crossings that you need. So if you want to have stop spacing every block and a half or 2 blocks on Veers Mill, you're going to need crossings every 2 blocks. And maybe this recommendation, I don't think is explicit in this, but if the solution is fewer bus stops that are more protected, which would have a side benefit of improving the quality of the transit service by improving the speed of the transit.
Also getting into, they are running articulated buses that go all the way down Veers, are ride-on buses presently in and out of Veers Mill. But again, and then we talk about running, MCDOT articulated BRT buses or BRT buses. So again, there's coordination there and coming up with a consensus, because if you're on a Metro bus, it's great to get off, perhaps get onto a,
Yeah, sure.
ride-on bus that takes you into the neighborhood. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I just wanted to, you had brought up the bus stops
Yeah.
earlier,
Yeah,
so I
no, I
just wanted
appreciate
to
that.
touch
Thank
on
you.
that.
Thank you very much.
There's also a set of recommendations about making the walk to school safer. So first, I think the primary key action here, the need for additional school crossing guards and the need to advocate for additional funding for those crossing guards. Commissioner Rubin had mentioned there's a recommendation here about walking school buses. Walking school buses are essentially chaperoned pedestrian trips for kids to get to school, where parents will take turns volunteering to really help their children and their neighbors' kids walk to school. I think there's an opportunity here to invest in active transportation to school in a way that MCPS is currently investing in buses, because oftentimes they're using buses to get around a dangerous roadway situation. So if there were opportunities to invest in walking and biking, to address crossing improvements through the MCPS budget that would remove the issue that led to the hazard busing in the first place. I think there would probably be long-term benefits for school-age kids, but then also for everyone else using the transportation system. And then I think the other really important key action here, which I think in my past work as a consultant, I've seen be very successful at sort of reducing trips and encouraging walking and biking, is working to implement a countywide transportation demand management plan for MCPS. So everyone from students up to staff members, just making sure that the trip making that they're doing is happening in a way, like we're not creating unnecessary trips, and we're encouraging people to take more sustainable modes of transportation to get to school. So that's another thought there. I'll jump ahead. Expand access. This is the accessibility theme. I think the really low-hanging fruit here is EA1, which is just to reduce tripping hazards. I think we have sidewalks across the county that are really inaccessible for people using mobility devices who are blind. I think the main issue that came up in conversations with people, particularly people in the disability community, is brick sidewalks is a major issue from a tripping perspective and a slipping perspective. So there's recommendations about ensuring, if we're going to be building these sidewalks, that they're maintained to the standard that they need to be to provide, to maintain accessibility and to provide an equal experience. Similarly, EA2 is about getting utility poles and other things like traffic signal boxes out of the sidewalk so the pedestrian space can be expanded. Yes, Commissioner.
On that point, Michelle Foster, who I think is actually a professional planner, although doesn't work for a planning firm at the moment. She lives down in Montgomery Hills area. Yeah. I had suggested to her that she look into whether the PSC could adopt performance standards for placement of utility poles to address this issue. And she told me she looked into it, and apparently there is some regulatory provision that requires utilities to avoid obstructing sidewalks. But obviously, if you walk around Montgomery Hills and any number of other places, yeah, you'd be hard-pressed to prove it. So perhaps, I guess I have two suggestions at that point. One is, could you look into whatever rules exist at the PSC or elsewhere? And maybe part two of that is suggest how whatever requirements exist or don't exist could be strengthened to make them more enforceable. So for example, I know in utility regulation, sometimes there are standards for electrical utilities or telephone utilities that if their network is down more than a certain percentage of the time, they get fined, or they can't recover part of the cost that they would normally be charged to ratepayers. So if there were some consequence to placement of a utility pole in the middle of a sidewalk such that it prevented safe access or compliance with ADA or whatever the standard was, that there could be some meaningful incentive for utilities to get the pole placement right.
I think that's a good point, and I think this recommendation as written today is really more backward facing, looking at the massive issues that we already have in Montgomery Hills. I think the one that comes to mind most for me is River Road, sort of under the Capitol Crescent Trail. There's like a 4-foot sidewalk with like many utility poles just right in the middle of it. So I think your suggestion to add, sort of looking ahead to make sure we're not like perpetuating this problem, is a good part to add to that set of recommendations.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than seeing a new
Yeah, I
utility
agree.
project that puts the poles right back in the middle of the sidewalk. It costs like $80,000 a pole or something like that to move them, and if they're going to build a new one and don't get it right, boy, that's a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, agreed.
Again, just given my knee and other issues, I go into therapy at Suburban Hospital, and I do enjoy seeing the bikeway there. But again, I look at the bicycle that were there where the young man was, and it is a utility that got him into the street, and that was off the sidewalk because of a hydrant, and the hydrant is still there. His bike and picture is still there. But again, I guess that was a cooperative effort with State Highway to get that bikeway in. Is that true, Casey, or?
I'm sorry, which
That old
The old
Georgetown Road, the
Georgetown.
bikeway, is that a good cooperative effort with State Highway to get that in, or?
Well, it's more cooperative now than it was before 2 people got killed there.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
unfortunately,
but
that there was, I actually was involved in, before I was on the planning board around 2008, when the BRAC improvements were being made there.
Yeah.
Trying to, and Dave, I think, just had shown up
Yeah,
at that
but
time.
I mean,
right?
that's a good example of getting
Yeah.
things like you're talking about, getting them done, and I think that's been very expedient on Old Georgetown Road.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
the council was discussing this just last couple of days with briefings with both T&E and the full council, and I think they were expressing frustration with the fact that it took so long, and really you shouldn't have to, wait until somebody is seriously injured or killed before somebody takes action. And it's not like that wasn't pointed out to them. I don't think there's a lack of awareness or coordination. There's a lack of action, honestly, in a lot of cases until something really bad happens. And, I think there's a variety of people at the various agencies trying to focus more attention on that, but it's really frustrating that it takes so long.
No disagreement here. There are a couple more in here that I want to touch on. I think in our work and in our discussions with people, we found that I think a really key recommendation is making pedestrian signals more accessible. I think if you travel around the county has done a great job of installing these push-button signals, which I think the primary function that a lot of people associate with them is to trigger a pedestrian phase, which we have recommendations about getting away from that. But the main function for people who are blind or have low vision is to provide wayfinding and help them know when to cross the street safely. The problem with how many of these are installed is that they're installed in such a way that somebody who is blind would not be able to locate the actual button itself. So defeating the purpose of the installation. I think probably the highest profile location of this that I've seen in this area is on the southeast corner of Amherst and University. I'm going to get to sort of our media press stuff in a minute, but there was a WJLA interview that I did where the reporter reported from that corner and sort of walked through how difficult it was to get to that signal. So this recommendation is essentially about taking a census of all of these locations countywide and then appropriately moving the signal buttons so that they can be used by people who are blind or have low vision, which is their main intended purpose. So I think that's a really key recommendation here as well.
Or the motion censored so that it doesn't require anyone to actually, I mean, that has its drawbacks.
Yeah, well, I think
because
it's
if
sort
people
of
just walk by and don't intend to cross the road, is that going to trigger? But I do think that I've seen many places in the country that have automatic signals. Like if somebody is standing there to cross, you get these, flashing lights.
Yeah, I think that functionality of whether it's triggered automatically is sort of separate from the tactile functionality that people in the blind community really need. I think there's support in the blind community, people who I've talked to, for removing the need for people to push the button to cross the street safely, but they still need to be able to access the button to know when it's time to cross, and how the button's oriented aligns them appropriately with the crosswalk and things like that. So they serve sort of two parallel functions, and I think this plan is all in favor of removing some of that, like, quote unquote, like beg button necessity, but I think the tactile functions for accessibility will still need to remain. So just keep going. Monitor, again, this is generally about improving transparency and accountability. So we have a recommendation to make a pedestrian master plan sort of tracking website and do a report in concert with the bicycle master plan monitoring report, just tracking our metrics and progress in this plan over time. And then there's another recommendation here, similar to the discussions we've been having about doing a review of 311 pedestrian requests from an equity perspective to understand sort of disparities in where the county is getting pedestrian requests via 311. So we can understand sort of potential pitfalls in that reactive system, which I would imagine would provide additional support for some of our more data-driven proactive recommendations to get away from 311 type system for those sorts of things. Funding, there's really one recommendation, is to identify new revenue sources. Some of the key actions here are just ideas that we had. I'm not sure, I think we're obviously open to critique and feedback on these, and any additional ideas, any additional creative ideas people have. But things like embracing sort of the Donald Shoup market parking pricing approach to street parking, so that people looking for street parking can always be sure they'll have a spot, but the price of the parking will likely be higher than it is today. With the additional increment going to fund pedestrian and bicycle projects, thinking about some sort of taxation that sort of is levied across the county to fund pedestrian and safety improvements. An example, the city of Seattle voters have over time elected to tax themselves to fund mobility projects and then also sidewalk projects. So whether that's a tax that is sort of put up for referendum or something, the mechanics of that are sort of beyond this plan, but acknowledging that if pedestrian issues, if Vision Zero is a priority for the county, thinking about more creative ways to fund it, looking to expand automated traffic enforcement is in here. I think we got some feedback that I appreciated from members of the public that automated traffic enforcement, I think, is the goal of it at the end of the day is to improve safety. So hopefully at a certain point in the future, automated traffic enforcement won't be necessary, or driver behavior will respond to the enforcement. So it's not helpful, I think, to include this as a long-term revenue source, which I think is a thoughtful comment that we received. So I think we are thinking of moving this recommendation into the protect section to really just emphasize the importance of automated traffic enforcement from that perspective. But I think in the short term, there will be potential monetary advantages to using that. And then circling back, F1D, to our conversation about sort of dangerous vehicles, developing legislation to tie vehicle registration fees to safe vehicle design. I think many people in this room have seen Washington, D.C. recently they changed their vehicle registration structure to charge more money to larger vehicles, to heavier vehicles. So I don't necessarily think it's definitely the easiest approach, I think, to charge more money to heavier vehicles, because that's something you can more tangibly measure. But I think what we're trying to achieve is to make sure that vehicles that have demonstrated pedestrian safety issues are accounting for those issues, and we're using that additional funding to improve the pedestrian experience. And then on the margins, ideally disincentivize the purchase of those vehicles.
I would just be cautious about the equity issues related to that. There are many trades folks.
Sure, yeah.
Who need larger trucks or a certain kind of vehicle to do their business. And that could tend to impact the ability of them to make a living and, make a living wage. So I just be mindful of
I think
that.
that's a really good point. I think it's actually very similar to the fire and emergency conversation where the larger vehicles that are very popular today are not necessarily providing additional functionality from a transportation or a utility perspective, but cost more and are significantly more dangerous for people. But I think it's an important thing to consider, especially when we're talking about sort of taxation and things like that. You agree? No notes? Okay. Okay. That is actually not the end of this. I have a couple more things to talk about. I wanted to highlight something we're working on now, which is the next piece of the recommendations is to create a data-driven prioritization for where the county is investing in pedestrian projects. And we wanted to involve the public in a more interactive way in that discussion. And we created this pedestrian prioritization tool to help people to really sort of tear back the curtain and provide a more open experience with how data sort of feeds into where priorities may be. So we created this website where people can review the prioritization factors on the right. Essentially, you can say, I want to invest more resources in areas where there's already greater pedestrian activity, or there's more pedestrian crashes, or they're missing sidewalks, or there are equity needs, things like that. This tool allows you to spend 100 points between these priorities, these different factors. So if you thought that missing sidewalks was the most important, you could put all 100 points on missing sidewalks, essentially. And then you can click Visualize and see with the darker shaded parts of the county where your values essentially map to physical space. So where, for me, this is just 10, 10, 10, 10. I've just equally divided it. But you can see that on this screen, Silver Spring really stands out. Wheaton stands out. Aspen Hill, Glenmont, parts of East County along the US 29 corridor, Montgomery Village. We're really highlighting, even in this just very balanced look, some of the areas of the county that have the most need based on these variables. So what we've asked people to do is essentially fill out this analysis or to complete the survey. I've pulled it up here. Essentially, there's a website that explains what we're trying to do, how to use the tool, and then allows people to do their prioritization, their analysis. This is the exact same one that I just showed. It loads very quickly. I think.
Eli, we cannot see the tool.
Okay. Then I will go back to. Okay, so it's this tool. I'm not going to share it at this point, but this tool is, I think, a credit to ITI and Melissa Noak specifically in ITI. It incorporates and leverages a lot of different elements of our ArcGIS system that I think I'm very comfortable provides a lot of opportunities also for future master planning efforts to create a more interactive experience for other prioritization efforts, namely like different parks priorities or different bikeway priorities or things like that within a certain area. So she has been fantastic through this whole process, so I just wanted to thank her. Essentially, there's a website that this map is within that provides the appropriate context and information. And our goal is to, as we develop the plans prioritization approach, using this data is to incorporate the feedback we receive from the community in setting that approach. I think to date, we have received 97 submissions from people across the county using this tool of their priorities, which I think, to be frank, is more than I thought we would get, just given sort of the incredibly technical complicated nature of like what we're asking people to do, which I think is a credit to people's really interest and passion in pedestrian issues and their concern about improving their communities. So I just wanted to highlight that. Some additional engagement efforts we're doing in an equitable way. Just go through this quickly. Our community advisory group has continued to meet, has been briefed on these recommendations, and has made very helpful comments. We have stakeholder representatives from all of these different groups across the county. And then we also have members that applied from these different neighborhoods on the right countywide. And they have been active participants throughout this master plan process, from sort of the data collection phase, existing conditions, and now in the recommendations, and future in the sort of the draft plan stage as well. So that feedback's been very helpful. Community meetings, to date, just on the recommendations that have been presented to you, we've met with all of these groups across the county, and we'll continue to meet with groups in the months ahead. So I think some key ones here, we'll be presenting to all of the community advisory boards across the county. I've presented multiple times throughout this process to the Commission on People with Disabilities and the American Council for the Blind. I'll be briefing the Joint Transportation Management Districts meeting in the next month or so.
Could you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I was just, for a second, I didn't see anything from East County, but I see that you are engaging the CAB, so that's good. Okay, thank you.
And then in addition to just the traditional community meetings where I'll come in and give a more abbreviated presentation about this, we've tried to do a lot of other efforts to get word out about this plan. We sent postcards to the 3,500 contacts that were accumulated through the Thrive engagement, contacts at religious institutions, civic associations, homeowners associations, to try and encourage people to learn more about the plan, and then to reach out to me personally if they wanted to schedule a meeting or something like that. And these postcards had the call to action in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. We've also, I think, been fairly active on social media. I think a couple years ago, we started this Walking Here campaign for people to share their experiences about walking in Montgomery County. That hashtag has persisted, and people have been tagging Montgomery plans as well. These are just a snapshot of a couple of the different tweets that we've gotten as part of this. And in my discussions with communications staff, I think there's also been fairly fruitful and constructive discussions about pedestrian topics related to the plan on Nextdoor, actually, which the communications division has been sort of pushing out some of this information through there as well. So I think that's really good to know. On the sort of print, broadcast, earned media side, I think we've had pretty decent coverage. I've been very excited about our coverage in print, quote unquote, in Bethesda Beat, in the Washington Post, Source of the Spring. And then we had a recent news article on WJLA ABC 7 about the plan. So we've been sort of reaching people sort of where they are who may not be traditionally interested in these issues. We've also worked, I think, in a really unique relationship, really exciting collaboration with Montgomery Parks to put signage in parks specifically in parks within our equity focus areas, in English, Spanish, and Mandarin, to really highlight different recommendations in the plan and to get feedback in that way, where people can text if the recommendation is important to them, or they have anything that they want to add, or any additional context or things like that. So we've sort of tried to, I think there's signs in about 50 parks across our equity focus areas in these different languages. We've also we have ads out on 10 bus shelters in our equity focus areas, so Germantown Road, Frederick Road, University, Randolph. And then there are 30 bus ads on ride-on buses that are operating from both the Gaithersburg and the Silver Spring depots as well. Really an effort to target communities where in the past we have not had as much feedback and engagement as we would like. And then this is just the summarized community feedback we've gotten to date. I believe it's in attachment B is the summary of the community concerns that we've heard so far and the our community comments, and then the staff's potential response moving forward to address those. Things like limiting noise, doing more to reduce conflicts between pedestrians and turning vehicles, the automated enforcement piece I spoke about earlier, increased educational resources, signal accessibility, roadway design, roadway signage and striping, doing more to protect pedestrians from motor vehicle crashes, streetscape amenities, and then I think one that is going to become even more important in the years ahead is sort of electric vehicle charging in the right-of-way. So developing some recommendations about that. Those are all in attachment B. And then one of the last things I have here, attachment C is a letter from Montgomery County DOT expressing some reservations about, I would say, the plan recommendations in general, and then some concerns about specific recommendations. Andrew Bossi is on the call as well from DOT. If Andrew, I guess if you'd like to weigh in on this, you're welcome to. I see you.
Eli, before we get to comments from MCDOT, I think a countywide plan can be quite challenging, especially with recommendations that are high level, to get engagement from all areas of the county. One thing we had talked about bringing up was, at this point in the planning process, we're putting together our recommendations, and we wanted to put to the commissioners, are there other forms of engagement that you all think that we should be pursuing at this point?
Yeah, I would add, because part of the comments that we received from others about the outreach is, I see English, Spanish, Mandarin. But for example, and I don't know what the other languages are, but if you were to look, Silver Spring is has a very, very heavy Ethiopian community. And that's where a lot of things, I didn't see anything about the Semitic languages that, I just think that we could probably look a little further and get into, maybe a little fine grain of the different communities that tend to have representatives in other areas, bring those community partners in and see how they can help with that outreach. And we may need to look at other languages besides the three.
I concur with Commissioner Rubin. It's Amharic is the language that, Amharic is the language. And you might want to talk with Ms. Bruyere, because for Thrive, we had a multi-pronged approach, and that multilingual and Amharic was on the list. My question, and some of you probably saw me walk over to Mr. Ansbacher and give him a note. My note that I passed to him was, I don't see a lot of up-county representation, and I know that my colleague asked about East County, and I think that's going to be important. In your map, your illustrative map, you showed Germantown, you showed parts of Montgomery Village. As development continues in those areas, we're getting input regarding concerns, speed. I know around the transit area, we now have the 20 is plenty in place, but I'm going to make some recommendations to you. One is Destination Germantown, which is a meeting of both business owners as well as other entities that are representing both Germantown and Clarksburg. Clarksburg also I didn't see on the list, and I know there's been concerns regarding pedestrian traffic and vehicular flow and safety. I will make a plea on camera for those who are in East County as well as in Up County. You constantly tell us we're not reaching out. Show up. Reach out to these two gentlemen. Get involved. Tell them what's going on. On a neighborhood advisory email, and I constantly see messages about, I didn't know this was happening. Who do I tell? If you're concerned about the sidewalks and moving about, they're making the option available to you. I don't know if your meetings are happening online or in person, but Again, those are details that you can find out from Mr. Anspacher, Mr. Glazier. I'll vouch for them. They're reasonably nice people. But, definitely get involved. There's no reason why, when I look at this list, we shouldn't see more selected members from various communities throughout this county. All of us walk. All of us have had instances where we've tried to get across the street and we wondered, who made this lighting and why isn't the signal longer? If we don't say something, nothing's going to happen.
Thank you for those comments. I think another sort of avenue of engagement or outreach that's happened to increase awareness of the plan is, in addition to presenting to each of the citizens advisory boards, each of the regional service centers have put links to sort of our website and the call to action to participate in their newsletters over the past several weeks. So I think we appreciate the comment, and I think we're happy to meet with anyone who's interested in pedestrian issues to talk about this and to get perspective. So I appreciate it. So yeah, we presented these recommendations. We've done a lot of engagement, and MCDOT has some comments about the recommendations, I guess. So I will defer to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Bossi, if he wants to sort of provide any more elucidation on the bullets on the screen.
Sure. So Andrew Bossi, Montgomery County Department of Transportation, really comes down to three main points. The first one, none of these are really against any particular technical aspect of this plan. It's really just more the, I guess, higher up bureaucracy. The first one is how this relates to the Vision Zero action plan. Of course, master plans aren't really supposed to get into much more operational action sorts of items. Really the place for that in this case would be the Vision Zero action plan, which of course the group behind that includes planning as well. I recognize asking you to delete all these probably wouldn't fly out of the master plan. I think from your viewpoint, certainly it makes sense to include a lot of this in a pedestrian master plan. But they should at least be recontextualized as these are planning's recommendations for the Vision Zero action plan to incorporate. And that's something that will be starting up, I think it's in about a month. The next one of the rounds of updates coming up pretty shortly, where I think a lot of this could come up and potentially, hopefully, be incorporated into the Vision Zero action plan. The next item would be just warnings about costs. Some of these have pretty high costs behind them, which again is not necessarily a reason to oppose any recommendation. It's just that we should be cognizant of county resources and make sure we don't give the public an expectation that things may be implemented tomorrow when it might not even be within the lifetime of a typical master plan. Some of the examples include good ones, the snow clearing, shifting more snow clearing away from property owners to public resources. Good idea in principle. It's just that that's of course a massive demand on an operating budget that is just not there today. The passive pedestrian actuation, that's the pedestrian detection to cross streets and instead of having to press the buttons, would be a huge capital investment. Again, I think it's good idea in principle. It's just again the cost associated with that can be substantial. And one more example would be the including pedestrian access treatments as part of larger transit projects. Again, great idea, but tying those generally kind of more peripheral projects, while important, to larger transit projects can add just additional costs, complexities, additional kind of public processes. A lot of these sidewalks can be very controversial when you're already dealing with something that is probably a controversial project on its own right. So just a word of caution about trying to couple too much together as part of the same effort. The last big point would be focusing on the state roads. Of course, we're talking about this in depth a few minutes ago. It's another example of something that I think is a good idea in theory, but may not be easily achievable in practice. We've, of course, done road swaps. I think we have done some roads that just went one way and it wasn't really a swap and failed, but they tended to be pretty smaller pieces. Of course, these are talking about much more major roads. And on the one hand, the state may or may not be reluctant to give up some of those roads. They have, of course, their own mission about regional connectivity, which we can disagree with sometimes. And then, of course, there's like the financial aspects and a lot of those algorithms and so forth that go into how those finances are allocated between counties and so forth based on road mileage. So it's complicated. I would just urge that there's at least another recommendation, maybe that pairs with that. That might be a little bit more feasible, more achievable. That maybe just pressures that we lean on the state legislature and the executive branch to embrace, fund, and maintain a strong program focusing on pedestrian and bike safety, just to basically do more. Of course, one example of that is legislation I think is out right now or has been in the past, trying to get the state to take on more building and maintenance responsibilities for stuff behind the curb, including sidewalks and bikeways in particular, that tend to get pushed toward the local governments to handle when we feel it should be the states. And there's, of course, no end to other potential legislation that we could be proposing to get the state to do more. And I think that might have more room for advancing than trying to get state roads kind of on a one-way path to the county. If we can do it, great, but I'd just like to see that there's a backup option. That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Bossi, I would respond in 2 ways. Number one, if something belongs in another plan, I don't care. Put it in both plans. Because the more you say it, potentially the more attention it will get. So if it belongs in the Vision Zero plan, great. Let's put stuff in the Vision Zero plan, but don't take it out of this plan. The other thing is when you talk about the funding, I agree, but the idea of a plan is to establish and to allow those decision makers in the county to establish what the priorities are and to determine where they want their money to go. So, remember, it's a plan. These are ideas. If you don't ask, it doesn't happen. So I appreciate your comments, but I would I say the more the better.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, on the cost thing, the roads are put in master plans without doing even planning level cost estimates. So I just think the master plan of highways is full of roads that nobody has costed out.
I have.
Well, okay. But it wasn't done for the master plan of highways. Nobody did.
It was.
The whole plan was adopted, and then we did the bike plan, and Glen Orland suddenly decided it was really important to do cost estimates right after we'd done the master plan of highways without the necessity to figure out what all these random, and I'm not even talking about the big roads. I mean, even those little roads out in the ag reserve, some of the proposals in that plan were straighten out a intersection to a T that it was sort of off camber, and those are multi-million-dollar projects, even if they're very minor realignments, and nobody saw fit to try to figure out what that would cost. As far as the recommendations outside the scope of the master plans, I mean, I think we have come a long way with DOT from the days of a decade or so ago when DOT really pushed back hard on anything that might be considered operational. And I get it that there is a difference between our roles, but I just think on this kind of subject, you can't really avoid mixing up the peanut butter and the chocolate a little bit. I just think it's, you can't really write a pedestrian plan that doesn't touch on operational considerations, and it really doesn't make sense to either excise them completely or have one document or set of policies that DOT is in charge of figuring out and documenting and implementing, and having the planning department do the right-of-way particulars and the things that are more closely aligned to the geometry or size of intersections or right-of-way. So I just think that it's just not workable. And I think we've demonstrated over the last several years that we can work really productively and collaboratively together. As far as turning over state roadways, I actually think that could happen at some point. It'd be hard to do, but particularly in the more urban areas, I think it's entirely appropriate. And the real trick would be trying to figure out how to get the money that goes along with it. But I just think you gotta put that out there, or I mean, somebody has to state it as an objective, or even things that are considered routine today probably wouldn't have ever gotten done, including things like putting a lot of protected intersections for bicycles and pedestrian signalization, things that were rejected out of hand until very recently are now routine. So let's keep that in, I think.
I think you could get your wish. The state might be willing to do that. As I say, Baltimore City doesn't really have any state highways. But again, it impacts the county budget. Right now, it's shared. It might adjust a slight increase in the allocation out of the Maryland Transportation Trust Fund to local jurisdictions, but certainly it should be analyzed within the context of what can the county handle it if it was to assume all those?
Okay, very good. Moving on
I have
along.
like one more slide. Yeah. So just the timeline moving forward for this. We've presented the recommendations to you today. We're going to be continuing community engagement throughout the end of the year and then likely into the time when the plan is before you and then before council as well. I'm currently writing the draft plan, which is essentially stitching together the parts that you've already seen with these elements and with some additional narrative throughout. And that's going to go through the end of the year, and then we anticipate starting work sessions with you all in early 2023. So just our next steps, finalizing these recommendations in response to your feedback and to public feedback, continuing the internal engagement that we're doing, our interagency engagement with DOT and with other agencies, and then preparing the plan working draft. So I think we really appreciate your interest and support and great ideas here. And if anyone wants to continue offline, happy to talk. And then I guess we also had a thought that if you think it would be helpful, we're also prepared to begin briefing council staff about the plan and its existence and potential recommendations. If you think we'll sort of rely on your will be
Sure,
your
but
discretion.
you got a new crop coming in pretty soon, so maybe we should think about how to wrap that into some briefings, both for the new and old, the returning and the
Sure.
new
Okay.
council members.
Great.
You mentioned coordination. What can you define what your present on this plan with State Highway is, or they have a representative assigned, or?
Yeah, so
have
we, in
they-
addition to our community advisory group, we have an interagency working group where all of the representatives of that group, which includes State Highway, which includes Montgomery County DOT, have had an opportunity to review these recommendations since May.
Okay.
And different agencies have provided different amounts of feedback. I think Montgomery County DOT has provided both these higher level comments that Andrew Bossi
Yeah,
spoke
no,
about, but then also
State Highway, like Greenbelt, Region 3,
yes.
do you have contacts there as well at state headquarters in
Yes,
Baltimore?
yeah. So they've been we've met with this interagency group at multiple sort of critical junctures throughout the planning process, and they have weighed in to the extent that they felt comfortable on those
Good,
different elements.
thank you.
Yep. So that's all I have, but appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We will be back in a minute for the last item, which is about water and sewer category changes. Okay, we're back to talk about water and sewer category changes with Catherine Nelson.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Catherine Nelson in the Up County. And before you today are 4 water and sewer category change amendments. 2 are a request for water service, and 2 are a request for sewer service. These administrative cases fit well within the established policies, guidelines, and master plans, and therefore will go to the county executive for decision and not the county council. I'm prepared to go through all 4 cases if that's helpful.
I think we could probably get a motion to approve the staff's recommendations unless somebody wants to hear the gory details. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Jerry Sushi, so moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved.
Was that the easiest presentation you ever had to make, Kevin?
Yeah. Yes, we're adjourned.